Close your eyes with me for a second, and let's take a trip back down memory lane. You're walking into your local library. The smell of paper fills the air. Something about being here makes you want to poop. You aren't sure why, however, you press on to the graphic novels section. There's a spinning rack that has books placed with care all over it. One with a white spine and red text pops out from the crowd to you. It's exactly what you were looking for. The next volume of Vampire Knight. Now you can finally know if Yuki is actually going to get with Zero, or if Kaname finds out and tries to kill him first. But before you pick it up, you really have to go to the bathroom, and we don't want what happened last time to happen again. Run. Run to the bathroom. Don't let them call you Professor Pippy Pee Poopy Pants the second time. If you are a nerdy person who is around the preteen age in the mid to late 2000s like me, then you are acutely familiar with Shojo Beat manga. These staple white spine, red textbooks that could easily catch your attention with their beautiful covers. Shojo Beat was the centerpiece of many a sleepover with my friends. We would pass around volumes of manga and get in fights over who got dibs on which guy they liked best. When I go back to my teenage years of obsessing over manga, I think of how formative Shojo Beat was for me. However, it seems like these days, nostalgia is exactly what's keeping the wheel moving for this imprint. From recent title releases, most come from manga artists that are already familiar in this line, or the series themselves were coming out back in the 2010s. Manga titles like Wolf Girl and Black Prince or Rainbow Days already had animes that came out in 2014 and 2016. Other series like a Butterfly and My Love Mix-Up already had fans of these mangaka who would be willing to check out their other works. There's little risk involved from licensing manga that already had a fan base built in, even if that fan base is still quite small. This is a far cry from how the label was when I first started getting into the manga that they offered. The titles at the time were all fresh and exciting, ones that were having simultaneous impact on both the anime and manga community in America and Japan. This was the age of Ouran High School Host Club, Lovely Complex, Vampire Knight, Skip Beat, and Nana. All series that were acquisitioned not far off from their original releases, and let shoujo fans find a series while the anime was still airing. During this time, these shoujo manga were even selling more than some shonen titles in America. By nature of it using shoujo in the name of its imprint, Shojo Beat is what people think of when you say shoujo manga. Due to this, the brand is the driving force on how shoujo manga is viewed in Western spaces. Shojo Beat itself is even advertised as being the leader in shoujo manga, front and center on its website. But is this still the case? Is Shojo Beat leading the conversation for shoujo manga in 2023 and pioneering the trends? Or has the imprint become a shadow of what it once was? To answer these questions, we need to look at both the history of shoujo within the company that owns the label, Viz Media, as well as the history of Shojo Beat itself. To start, Viz Media is a publishing company that was founded in America in 1986 by a man named Seiji Horobuchi. He had originally moved from Japan to California and worked as a cultural exporter of American pop culture. Horobuchi eventually got interested in publishing manga and just happened to meet up with the head of Shogakukan when he was visiting America. The two of them cut a deal, and Shogakukan gave him $200,000 to start up a company that was then known as Viz Communications. Later on, Shueisha would then become their second investor, with Hakusensha to follow. There was an instant success though. Manga was not an entirely welcome type of media, and especially when it came to selling them in regular stores. Comics were found in special stores for comics, so selling manga in a bookstore was seen as a risk at the time. What Viz decided to do to combat this was change manga to graphic novels and sell them that way. They had set up a branch in the company for general publishing of art-related books, and they sold manga through this branch. The first big hit for the company after which was Ranma Half by Rumiko Takahashi in 1992. It wasn't until 2 years later, though, that Viz attempted to venture into shoujo manga. This thanks in large part to the then freelance translator, Rachel Thorne. She was the push they needed to dip their pinky toe into the pool of shoujo manga that was still untapped. They had set up an imprint of manga at the time called Viz Flowers Comics that was based off of the magazine Flowers in Japan. The first series to be published under it was a square-bound version of 2 stories by Keiko Nishi titled Promise. These 2 short stories were later compiled into what many consider to be the first shoujo manga ever published in America, 4 shoujo stories. Since Promise was published before, that would make it the first ever shoujo manga published. However, because it was a single issue, I don't know if that's why people don't count it as the first shoujo. Anyway, 4 Shoujo Stories was a compiled anthology of 3 different shoujo and josei mangaka from Japan. In this anthology, you could find Moto Hagio's famous series, They Were 11, Shio Sato's The Changeling, and Keiko Nishi's 2 stories, Promise and Since You've Been Gone. There was one glaring problem with this anthology being published, though. They did not have the rights to publish all 3 of these mangaka in one book together. In fact, Viz even knew that they would get in trouble for doing so, but they still did it anyway. When Shogakukan caught wind of this, they were royally pissed off, ultimately forcing Viz to pull 4 shoujo stories from shelves. Rachel Thorne remarked that before the anthology was published, they had even said, "What's the worst that can happen? They'll pull them from the shelves?" So yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy there. Despite the anthology series being dead in the water, it was released to quite a bit of praise by critics. This was one of the first introductions to shoujo ever in America, as prior there was only fan-translated versions of From Eroica with Love and a version of Rosa Versailles that was meant for Japanese students to learn English. This 1-volume anthology was able to show American readers the potential that shoujo manga has to offer. For the next couple of years, shoujo short stories by Keiko Nishi and Moto Hagio were released as well, continuing to slowly but surely introduce the demographic to the West. Now, the next big shoujo push by Viz was their attempt at their first ever shoujo-only magazine, Animerica Extra. This was a sister magazine to Animerica that began publishing in 1998. Some of the first series to run in Animerica Extra were titles like Fushigi Yugi, X 1999, Revolutionary Girl Utena, and Mikoku. Wait, hold up. One of these things is not like the other. Well, that's because Animerica Extra didn't actually advertise itself as a shoujo-only magazine until August of 2003. A note was published in that issue stating that from then on, all series that would be running in the magazine would be shoujo. After which they removed the shonen and seinen titles that were running inside and replaced them with more Yumi Tamura as well as a Revolutionary Girl Utena side story. This is also when we got a much more stable shoujo label from Viz. As I mentioned before, there was already the Viz Flowers Comics imprint, but they had only published 3 short stories before kind of vanishing. This could possibly be due to the fiasco with 4 shoujo stories being pulled from the shelves. However, the shift to Animerica Extra being shoujo only brought the new shoujo imprint, Viz Shoujo. For those of you who tried to collect older shoujo titles from Viz, this is the imprint that has the crescent moon logo with a person standing inside. This logo is pretty reminiscent of Sailor Moon, which funnily enough was owned by Tokyopop at the time and still had nothing to do with the Viz brand yet. You can see the switch to this new Viz Shoujo imprint by comparing the 2 volumes of Chicago by Yumi Tamura. The first volume of the series was published in October 2002 with the Animerica Extra logo on the spine. Upon opening, there is nothing on the inside other than the contents, production notes, and title logos. Conversely, volume 2 was published in April 2003 with the new Viz Shoujo logo, as well as inside there is an added description of what shoujo is on the first page. Another added change to the other Viz Shoujo series was the tagline in the back of the volumes that say, "At the heart of the matter." I wish I could say that Animerica Extra had a long and fruitful history of being a shoujo-only magazine, but I think since a lot of people my age may not even know what the magazine is, that speaks for itself. Animerica Extra, as a shoujo-only magazine, had a very short-lived run. The switch was made in 2003, and hardly a year later, the magazine was pulled in December of 2004. When the cancellation was announced in the magazine, no reason was given as to why, and refunds were sent out. This didn't affect the Viz Shoujo label that sprang from the magazine, though. Many series were still running when the magazine got axed, and they continued to run in their collected volume publishing. The last series to get licensed under this imprint was Doubt in April of 2005. With the downfall of Animerica Extra, we finally arrive in the shoujo station that the company currently resides in. Up until this point, Viz was clearly trying to make shoujo happen, but kept getting Regina Georged by itself. Whether that be its decision to publish a collected anthology series knowing there were consequences, or axing their one dedicated shoujo magazine. Other publishers were absolutely killing it with shoujo licenses at this time, while Viz was still trying to find their footing. Tokyo Pop had cornered the magical girl market with Card Captors and Sailor Moon, while also having a rising hit on their hands with Fruits Basket. Meanwhile, many shoujo titles from Viz Shoujo are considered classics today, but back then, they had a hard time getting attention. Viz needed a major rebrand to try and capture the audience for shoujo that they wanted. This rebrand came in July of 2005 with their second attempt at an all-shoujo magazine, Shojo Beat. This time, the magazine was shoujo from the get-go. Its hot pink, purple, and blue front pages were adorned with manga characters that appeared inside. Shojo Beat didn't just have manga though. They were also publishing articles on fashion and pop culture from Japan, making the covers of the magazine look reminiscent to other teen girl magazines like 17, but for nerds. Adorable presents to fill your stockings, or 10 must-haves for fall, were the headlines that could be seen next to characters like Nana or Yuki. This type of marketing for a manga magazine was pretty unique, as most magazines at the time that were manga or anime related were just manga or anime related. According to Shojo Beat's media kit, the magazine was targeting young girls that had an interest in art and style, that like to read series about romance. They go on to say that the magazine profiles the most popular shoujo manga coming out from Japan in 2004 that read as soap operas. Their estimated audience was going to be around 13 to 19, with hopefully the majority being 16 or older. With this target audience, Shojo Beat ran their first ever issue in June of 2005 that had Nana Komatsu on the cover. The issue had a circulation of 20,000 copies upon launch, with 43,000 becoming the average around 2007. 6 manga debuted in the first issue of the magazine, those manga being Kazehikaru, Absolute Boyfriend, Godchild, Crimson Hero, Baby and Me, and the most popular of the bunch, Nana. Along with Shojo Beat's magazine launch also came a new imprint for shoujo manga under the company. This time it was directly tied to the magazine's name, most likely helping with visibility for the titles. The new imprint brought the staple design of the white spines with red text on them that we all know and sigh at. I'm sorry to say, these spines are just boring. They may be a staple, but that doesn't mean that I have to like them. As of late, they at least have a little more flavor per each title though, and sometimes we even get a little more than just a white spine. Still, my shelves would look very homogenized if it weren't for the fact that I have series from other imprints and publishers. This is beyond the point though. Shojo Beat also came with a new logo that has remained unchanged since its conception. A hot pink SB that is encased in a circle with a little sparkle next to it. This logo was the initial version for the text on the Shojo Beat magazine covers, which would probably help the magazine readers be able to spot a volume in store a little easier. I may not like the sameness of each manga, but I do see the value in an easy identifier for your products. While I called all of this a rebrand of their previous shoujo line, this technically isn't the case. Viz Shoujo was still running a few manga titles when Shojo Beat had launched. 2 titles, Red River and Basara, didn't finish publishing until 2008, which was well into Shojo Beat magazine's run. They even had 2 series that they published in the former imprint Imprint before the rebrand, Doubt, which I mentioned earlier, and Happy Hustle High. So while Shojo Beat was a rebrand, Viz Shoujo was still alive and well and continuing running the series that they were publishing. Though neither acknowledges the other series that are running in their imprints, so essentially it seems that Viz kind of jumped ship for a shiny new toy to play with in the end. From 2005 on, Shojo Beat was growing in popularity each year. The increasing number of magazines sold was starting to carve out a niche group of fans. Unfortunately, though, that didn't include myself. My library had never carried the Shojo Beat magazine, although they did have plenty of Shonen Jump ones. The only reason I even knew that there was a Shojo Beat magazine back when I was a kid was because there was a subscription form that you could fill out in the back of the volumes, and I would always try to fill it out and give it to my mom, who would then promptly say no. My only form of Shojo Beat exposure during this time was in the collected volume format that just happened to show up on my library's bookshelves. The Shojo Beat imprint also accumulated some impressive titles under its belt in these years. Ones that have basically become mainstays for the anime and manga community even to this day. Ever heard of a little series called Vampire Knight? Yeah. Of course you have. Literally, who hasn't? It was a juggernaut of a series that combined gothic art with forbidden love. In more ways than one.
I'm Briggs Hatton. I wrote the Community Season 6 Incest episode.
The manga popularity was basically guaranteed success, with Twilight Fever hitting every middle to high schooler. Along with this title, you have another inescapable manga to this day Ouran High School Host Club. The romance comedy that was peppered with equal parts subtle parody of manga and nerd culture, as it was great heart-pumping drama. However, we do also need to remember that this is all happening in the mid-2000s. For any of you non-millennials, that means this is a time when there is about to be a life-changing recession for most people. No, I'm not here to explain the housing market crash to you. I don't even think I could if I tried, since at the time I was a wee child who was playing Dance Dance Revolution while my parents were discussing financial options to the soundtrack of Fatboy Slim. All you need to know for the purpose of this video is that it happened, and things were affected. People had no money, which means businesses had less money, which means they started to cut costs wherever they could. For Viz, that cost cutting came in May of 2009 when the Shojo Beat magazine suddenly stopped taking subscriptions. When people started to realize that they couldn't renew their monthly sub, Viz ended up making a statement. They cited the difficult economic climate as a reason for stopping the publication and said that the last issue would come out in June. Along with this, they said that any Shojo Beat subscriber would get a free copy of the next issue of Shonen Jump. Not exactly the most adequate crossover in audience there, not just with the manga being different, but with the interest as well. What I find gives the most insight into the loss felt by many people at the time was a roundtable that was documented by the school library journal. Many of the people who discussed this were incredibly upset over the magazine's soon-to-be absence, not just in their own lives, but in the lives of their library goers as well. They recount how valuable the manga inside the magazine was for their introduction to a variety of new shoujos. Also saying that the articles inside Shojo Beat were creative, diverse, and informative on Japanese culture. There were columns on Japanese ghost stories and myths to pieces about women manga artists. A majority of the people who led this discussion expressed their disappointment that this decision was purely money-driven. It was clearly a difficult time financially back then, but many of the points that are still harped on today were said back in 2009. Pointing out the demise of women-oriented manga anthologies may reflect the industry's opinion on them at large, whether that's purposeful or not. Another concern was whether these magazines being pulled was going to create snide comments from other industry professionals as proof that girls don't read comics. It's crazy how little has changed even in 10 years. One writer had pointed out the lack of time tie-ins and sponsorships that Shojo Beat had in contrast to its counterpart Shonen Jump. The American version of the best-selling manga anthology in Japan had an insane push by Shueisha upon its release. It had the likes of Cartoon Network backing it, along with promotional content, toys, and games. Shojo Beat did have tie-ins, but on a much smaller scale, and had much less of a decisive push for the magazine like Shonen Jump did 3 years prior. Sure, it's not Viz's fault that anime based off shoujo manga is often forgotten, toys and marketing even more so, but that doesn't make the discrepancy of accessibility any less visible, especially as those tie-ins came from Shueisha having connections to Cartoon Network, where mostly shonen was shown on. Many people ended up blaming those who never had monthly subscriptions to the magazine and only purchased on stands. There were many comments at the time from bloggers, professionals, or otherwise, going along the lines of, I was never subscribed, but I purchased when interested. This led others to conclude that the magazine just didn't have enough interest with most people, so of course it was bound to fold. However, others did express that while they may not have been subscribers, they still religiously bought whatever issue they came across. This ultimately leads me to wonder what Viz was doing that they couldn't retain the monthly readership for a seemingly well-loved magazine. In Japan, Furoku is basically a shoujo manga magazine mainstay to getting readers buying their own copies. You get your own magazine subscription, or you buy your own magazine on stands, and you get a little goodie inside, incentivizing you to buy your own instead of sharing it with friends, which boosts sales. Shojo Beat was already copying manga anthologies with its colored printing, but for some reason didn't take a page out of the Furoku book. A Nana keychain, a Crimson Hero sweatband, or a Oran High School Host Club notepad would have been a fun little addition to find in your monthly Shojo Beat subscription. You wouldn't want to miss out on the next issue of the magazine if you knew that a little doodad from a series you like is going to be coming with it. Obviously, this is all too little too late. I do wonder though if this idea was ever floated around in a meeting room at the time with the apparent lack of tie-ins for this magazine. Sometimes a little extra care needs to be put into the marketing towards an already isolated group in a niche market. The end of the Shojo Beat magazine was basically the last time that Shojo Beat had any big change of note to its imprint. Over the years, Shonen Jump has evolved from a magazine and imprint to an online accessible magazine to a now essential manga reading app for almost any and everyone. Shojo Beat has stayed as just an imprint that churns out new titles a few times a year. After the magazine ended, it was still chugging along nicely with tens of new exciting titles coming out at the time, like Natsume's Book of Friends, Library Wars, and Dengeki Daisy. This only lasted for a few years before the imprint started to slow down, beginning to only publish a handful, with this selection being a little lackluster or filler, if you will. This slowdown became even more noticeable in 2018 when 4 to 5 titles being licensed each year became the norm. This lack of change or modernization to the imprint is why I believe that it's basically been treading water since the 2010s. It has essentially been coasting for years now, being constantly left behind by its shonen sibling. When Shonen Jump started going digital, Shojo Beat continued in its print format, becoming increasingly less accessible as the printing shortage began during the pandemic. This at the same time as anime and manga are on the rise. There are ways that Shojo Beat is digitally accessible by the volume, but this is still quite a hefty cost in comparison to the $1.99 for the entire Shonen Jump catalog that you get for the app. I won't repeat myself too much because I have talked about this before in other videos, but it's just a very apparent example of stagnation. One of the few ways to even engage with Shojo Beat on social media is through Tumblr, which is pretty emblematic that the label is stuck in the 2010s. Tumblr has not been a widely used platform since 2016, with Twitter becoming most people's preference for engaging. Shojo Beat does also have a Twitter, but that is mostly used for updates and retweets. There is not much engagement with the audience beyond replying to questions once or twice a year there. These are the only two forms of engagement that you can have with Shojo Beat, with Tumblr being their preference. In the last year as well, frustrations with the imprint have been continually coming to a head between fans and the company online. The first big instance of controversy began when someone asked the editor whether back-ordering classic shoujo manga like Red River would ever make them come back in print. In response to this, the editor said that sometimes classics do come back in print, but if you want to buy them, you should buy them promptly. Now, this would have been the end of that statement, but the editor had then alluded to a post they made a few years back that drew ire. Users on Twitter went to find this post that they alluded to, you know, since they brought it up, and it's a little more than patronizing. Now, I'm going to be a meanie because I sometimes am. Did you not buy a series that we published over 13 years ago? 10, 8, 7, 6, 5? Now maybe you were one of the few that did. That's amazing. You have great taste in manga. I'm not talking to you. But for all the other people who didn't buy it back then and think they should have a chance at it now, no way. I don't feel sorry for you. You had your chance. We absorbed the losses because you didn't collect it when we were publishing it. What it also did is make publishing something new in that particular genre or by that mangaka more difficult because the booksellers know that you didn't buy those series. There's several things to point out with this post. First of which is that many people who are collecting manga now were either not alive back then or did not have money of their own at the time to buy these manga. While I am on the older end of the online manga community, I was still only in 8th grade when the tail end of these Viz Shoujo series were releasing. I was not able to buy them since I, like many other children, did not have a job at 14. This post was made in 2018, so whoever was asking was probably also not much older than me, if not the same age. Wishing for punishment on someone simply for hoping that they don't have to pay scalper prices on a manga that they never got the chance to read is just a little harsh as a company representative, especially when the company is blaming the consumer who was not their consumer at the time. The other thing to note about this is something that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. Viz Shoujo and Shojo Beat never crossed promotionally and basically pretended that the other didn't exist even though they were both coexisting at the same time. You can't find advertisements for Red River or Basara in the back of Shojo Beat manga. You also can't find ads for Nana or Kazehikaru in the back of any Viz Shoujo titles. So for fans that only started following Viz because they had a sparkly new Shojo Beat line, they may not have even known that a previous Shoujo imprint existed. I know for a fact that I didn't when I was growing up, and for that matter, I didn't even know the names of most of these Viz Shoujo titles until later in life. Even for people older than me who were consumers at the time, still had a hard time finding Viz Shoujo series on shelves. I understand the frustration that comes with having to answer repetitive questions as someone who runs these social media platforms. I can even understand getting annoyed with the people who just keep asking these questions and don't get it. But what I don't get is how a company is talking down to its consumer in such a condescending way. You have people basically asking to give you money, and while that doesn't always mean that you can meet these demands, that doesn't mean you can talk down to them. This is only isolating an already isolated audience of non-men by basically saying, well, sucks for you, you should have been born sooner and you're poor. The person who is running their social media is an editor. Why has Shojo Beat not been allocated someone who is more equipped at handling socials? We only have one point of contact who has been openly hostile towards the audience over the years. I really don't want to harp on this one person because they are, in fact, a person. It's just incredibly hard not to talk about Shojo Beat without mentioning them because they are the sole point of contact for any information on reprints, licenses, and updates. When I scoured Tumblr for other posts by them because I wanted to see what all this company has said over the years, this sort of animosity has been nothing new. Even back then, Shojo Beat fans were upset about the same things that we are upset about even 4 years later. One big point of contention was the manga acquisitions that were desired at the time. A user on Tumblr had asked about the best way to get Shojo Beat to license a title that was in high demand, and whether being vocal online was a good way to do so. The response to this user was once again just a little hostile for the question that was being asked, referring to the high demand online as being from people who stole the manga through scanlations. While that could be the case, there's also just as many people who want a manga because they found it on My Anime List or AniList, since they have unlicensed manga listed on those sites. Furthermore, assuming that anyone who asks for unlicensed manga is pirating basically makes it seem like their demand is tainted. How else are fans going to ask for the manga they want if they'll just be assumed as having pirated the manga and not taken seriously? Of course, a company is going to be staunchly anti-piracy. I'm not gonna try and argue that piracy doesn't affect their bottom line. The issue is that over the years, accessibility has played a huge part in making piracy less of an issue with companies. In an interview with the co-founder of Valve, Gabe Newell, he states his belief that piracy isn't an issue of price, but of convenience. Put more simply, it's a service problem. He states that if a product is going to be released 3 months after its release elsewhere, and the product can only be bought in stores, then that makes the pirater's service more valuable. Newell goes on to state that with the accessibility of Steam, their whole goal was to create a service that proved more value than that of the pirators, and making it a non-issue. This is why services like Spotify or Apple Music killed a platform for piracy like LimeWire. The digital age brought accessibility to media for a quickly growing online presence. The issue with Shojo Beat, like I mentioned earlier, is that there is no easily accessible platform to attain their manga. If piracy is an issue with a service, then the service is the one that needs to adapt. If Shojo Beat has such a huge issue with piracy, then Viz needs to work for its consumer instead of against it. Shaming the audience, slapping them on the wrist, and saying if you read manga online, you'll never get the manga you want is only going to push their consumers away. There needs to be a change in Shojo Beat if it not only wants to modernize, but to grow. Adding titles to a platform that is $1.99 or creating a separate platform for their shoujo series would give accessibility to their audience. Hi, just wanted to cut in real quick here and make sure that it's clear that I'm not trying to argue for or against piracy here. I just wanted to add a little bit of nuance to this conversation. Basically what I'm trying to say is I find that the interview with Gabe Newell is very relevant since this is an actual big company that is talking about piracy as a them problem and not a consumer problem. Just wanted to make sure it's clear, not arguing for or against anything. Just want to add nuance. If you agree or disagree, that's up to you. Let's move on. Now, there is one Shojo Beat title that is available on the Shonen Jump app, which leads to our next big Shojo Beat controversy. I don't want to talk about it, honestly. It's been run into the ground so much that Shojo Beat fans are basically just beating a dead horse at this point. Those who listened, listened, and those who didn't, very proudly still don't. The reason it is such a big issue, though, is mostly for what it means for Viz Media as a company, as well as Shojo Beat. So let's beat this dead horse just a little bit further and talk about Romantic Killer. This was a manga that was announced in February of 2022 and was put under the Shojo Beat imprint. An imprint that up until that point had been for strictly shoujo and josei manga. Romantic Killer was a shonen title, and not just any shonen title, but a Jump Plus title. Jump Plus is a mobile app that was created as a spin-off for the Shonen Jump magazine to publish more original works, as well as offer digital versions of the Shonen Jump magazine. The service reported that in 2022, it had a majority of male users, with 65% being men. The decision to put Romantic Killer in the Shojo Beat imprint meant that a shonen title was prioritized, which understandably upset a fan base that was growingly tired. Debates online sprung up from those who opposed the backlash over this decision. They argued that Romantic Killer was in fact a shoujo because the author actually stated so in an interview. The interview in question that they propped up as proof of it being a shoujo being only Google translated and not really making any sense. It was so widely spread that people started to tell shoujo fans they were wrong for expressing frustration translations that romantic killer was put in the Shojo Beat label. When I asked Fatima of Saffron Apple Pie to take a look at this interview for me, they had said that this was the best translation of what was said. If I were to classify the genre, it would be shoujo manga. I'm sure everyone is thinking, what? Shoujo manga? I also feel like, what? Shoujo manga? It's a rom-com, but it leans heavily on comedy, so I guess it's more of a com-rom. First and foremost, I was informed by Fatima that you should basically never take anything said by creators in interviews as the gospel. Continuing to tell me that there is a word in Japan called tekito, which basically is in reference to when you say something that is just off the cuff or you were just winging it at the time. Basically what this boils down to is that any creator interview comes with a grain of salt. Likely this is the same way that we've gotten iconic lines from the Don't Worry Darling press conference from Harry Styles.
You know, my favorite thing about the movie is like it feels like a movie.
Not everything said by a creator in a continual press junket format is going to hold a ton of weight. Later in the same interview, the author also stated that they don't really know how to draw shoujo-esque scenes, and if a reader was looking for that, then they might not get what they hoped. There was one more thing that was pointed out to me by Fatima when I asked if they had ever heard of a manga changing demographics because an author said so in passing. Fatima had told me that Romantic Killer, which is available on Rent-A-JP, is under the shonen category. While they weren't 100% sure on Renta's policies, they told me that it's pretty likely that they had it listed under that because the publisher told them to. Not only does Renta have to strike a deal with the publisher to even have the title listed, but they also have to strike a second deal to have it available to rent. So it would be remiss to think that the publisher isn't the one telling Renta how to categorize their titles. All that to say, Romantic Killer was a shonen title that was published under a historically shoujo and josei imprint. An imprint that only gives us up to 5 titles a year, with the year of 2022 having only given us 3. Romantic Killer being one of those 3. Getting a Jump Plus series licensed in this imprint meant that it was taking the slot of a shoujo title instead. Viz has stated that they only license new titles for anything outgoing in their individual imprints, meaning that a spot was taken. This could most likely be due to the Jump brand having more accessibility because of the app, or just Shueisha pushing their shonen titles as priority. Either way, it felt like an extra slap in the face of shoujo fans who were already being underserved. It feels like an extra slap in the face when you find out that there was a shoujo manga that had a pretty similar premise that began running in 2020 under the Shueisha publishing branch. It was a series called God is Telling Me to Fall in Love about a girl who is stuck in an otome game, but not like in the reincarnation sense. More in the sense of she has to repeat her days over and over again until she romances every single boy that is given to her as an option. It's an incredibly cool series that dives into the psychological at points, since this is something that would take a huge toll on someone. The manga only had 1 more volume than Romantic Killer did, so it's not even like it would have been impossible to license. It's not always an either-or situation for these kinds of things, but it is just that added sting to an already painful hit to the face. Shoujo fans have just been constantly feeling put out by Viz Media with their excessive equivalence of shoujo being romance over the past year. This is obviously most notable with putting Romantic Killer in the Shojo Beat imprint. However, there were 2 other instances that just keep digging this hole. After last year's July licensing announcements only brought 1 new Shojo Beat title to the imprint, Viz took to the shoujo Reddit to post all of their new romance manga and say, new shoujo titles. Just a month ago as well, they had referred to shoujo as a genre on their Twitter and didn't correct this mistake for days. This despite having corrected themselves almost immediately when they had called shonen a genre and giving a much more serious response to the criticisms as well. So, is Shojo Beat still the leader in shoujo manga? With all of that being said, honestly, It's hard to say. The imprint still clearly has highly sought after titles in its repertoire like Kami-sama Kiss, Banana Fish, Nana, and so on, all of which show up on weekly bestsellers lists online anytime a new reprint appears. These were also all titles, though, that were licensed before 2015 and got popular because of their animes getting popular. Post-2015 titles like Yona of the Dawn and Snow White with the Red Hair end up on weekly bestsellers lists as well anytime a new volume drops. But recent titles like Yakuza Lover, Imakoi, and Rosenblood have all been pretty middling for most Shojo Beat fans. Viz has first dibs to Shueisha, Shogakukan, and Hakusensha titles due to their direct partnership with these companies, and yet some of the most highly coveted manga titles that are coming out aren't getting licensed by them. Honey Lemon Soda is one of the best-selling shoujo manga series in Japan currently, and it's under the Shueisha publishing branch, yet this series went to Yen Press, meaning we could make a semi-educated guess that Viz passed up on licensing this title. It's hard to say if they just thought the series wouldn't sell as a high school romance, but on the flip side, the last 8 licenses in the Shojo Beat line have been high school romances. You also have one of the best-selling manga in Japan, Do Not Say Mystery, which is published under Flowers, and it went to 7 Seas. For this, I'm sure Viz was just wary of more Yumi Tamura titles since her previous ones didn't do well for them. However, in the last year, demand for this series was huge as its insane amount of success was making headlines. When it comes to romance manga currently coming out, Shojo Beat is really hardly on the forefront of most people's minds. You think of popular romance series right now, you think of A Sign of Affection or In the Clear Moonlit Dusk. Viz would have had no way to license these 2 titles since both of them come from a Kodansha magazine, so it's not like I'm blaming them for not having those series. It just shows me that they are having a hard time finding good romance manga to compete with very popular romance manga from other publishers, despite the fact that they have the entirety of the Margaret catalog that they haven't tapped into the new ones for years now, many of which were best-selling romance series with every new volume released. There's obviously many things that I don't know about the business. I can really only make educated guesses on what's going on behind the scenes at Shojo Beat from their responses that they give to people online. Even then, we'll never fully know the inner workings of the imprint unless we work there ourselves. I do want to try and offer options to people who want to do something though. From what I gathered, the editor has basically said that if you buy titles in a certain genre, it would incentivize them to license more titles in that same genre. Basically, if you want Called Game, buy their adventure series. If you want Futari Dekoi wo Suiryu, buy their high school romance series. Or if you want Colette Decides to Die, buy their fantasy manga. This isn't a direct correlation though. How will we know that us buying certain genres of titles will get us the actual title that we are wanting? Not all manga was written equally. And if someone submits a license request upon the editor's direction, are they going to be taken seriously or just assumed to have pirated the manga? The only option we were truly given is to mindlessly buy, even if we aren't enjoying what we're buying. This is less meant to be critical questions, but more genuine questions from a consumer who is feeling more and more backed into a wall and responsible for an entire brand. As much as I love Shojo Beat, I have my issues with it as well. My issues are because I want the imprint to do well though. I clearly buy plenty of Shojo Beat manga, as 5 whole shelves behind me are basically dedicated to this imprint. I stay up to date with Queen's Quality, King's Beast, Prince Freya, and My Love Mix-Up. In my experience, however, with each new licensing announcement from this company, the less Shojo Beat manga ends up on my shelves. I also feel my own excitement and anticipation for any new titles dwindling more and more. This video is in no way meant to be a huge hit piece or a slight against Viz Media or by proxy Shueisha, because I want them to put effort into this label. I really do love Shojo Beat. I grew up with all of this manga. By association of their name, they should be the leader in Shojo shoujo manga. But my attention is increasingly going towards other publishers who are offering exciting titles that I was actually interested in reading. Shoujo that aren't just the same mangaka over and over again, or titles that were releasing when I was in college. I will continue to collect the Shojo Beat manga that I am currently keeping up with until completion. But how long until I'm not picking up any Shojo Beat manga during my bi-weekly Barnes & Noble or local comic shop trips? It's hard to say. And it's hard to say even more if these concerns would be taken seriously or just thrown into the pile of naive, entitled consumer. All we can really do as Shojo Beat fans is continue to express these concerns and hope that the company who owns this label will eventually listen.